Simon and I just started, he reached out, I think he's the loveliest person and one of this new crop of gentlemen who have started writing about perimenopause and menopause and what their experiences are like in their own relationships. And I feel like some women don't like this. I feel like, and I'm going to ask you about that later, but I've been watching this space since 2017. I actively have been doing hot flash since 2020 and it's been crickets for men. Really, there's been absolutely nothing. And then this wave is beautiful to see and it's so different from the way men have been talking about it. So I'm trying to talk to more men. I think it's vital. I don't think we should leave them out of the conversation. I think should be quiet. And so I've already spoken to Simon behind the scenes, and that's why I wanted to do a live with him and just delve into all of this. So first of all, I'm just going to ask you to tell everyone like who you are, what your background is, and how this got started.
Sure. So I'm Simon Saul and I write at The Quiet Transition. I got started. This goes back a little bit about 8 years ago when my wife went into perimenopause. And we went through hell for the first 4 years, mostly because she was being dismissed by doctors. She was told it was everything except perimenopause, yeast infections, UTIs, lack of sleep, wrong diet, lack of exercise, all the things, everything except perimenopause. And so I think like a lot of men, I personalized, I internalized because I was hearing things like, well, your labs are normal. So if it's not her and the relationship is changing, there's only two people in the relationship, it must be me. So I'm either not doing what I'm doing, not saying what I'm saying, things that are wrong, and I need to fix that because that's what men do. We fix, we provide solutions. That's our wheelhouse. So that went on for 4 years until the fifth year, she actually found an OB that actually said, oh yeah, this is perimenopause. Let's actually look at what your symptoms are. Let's see what else is going on and let's see what possible treatments there are that might be available to you. Well, that was great. Now we had language. Still wasn't seeing how that affected me. Because the relationship had changed so much. And so there was at least another year and a half, another 18 months before I was able to go, okay, now I start to see that this isn't happening to her or me. This is happening to both of us. We're just coming at it from different perspectives. And if we come at it from the same perspective, we stop keeping score. Because, men especially, and I'm not trying to speak for all men, but men especially do keep score. I did this for you, you do this for me. It's transaction. I don't think it's intended, but that's just the way, men's brains work. And so then I started to dig in. I'm a voracious reader and I started to read anything and everything I could about perimenopause and the menopause transition. I started to ask better questions because I had better information. And then about this time last year, I told my wife I was going to write a book. I've written 3 books before on marketing, but so I understood the mechanism of writing a book. So because I didn't want other men to go through what I've been through and other couples to go through what we've been through. And then January of this year, I discovered Substack, started writing there, really to test ideas and to see how it would be received. And so far, so good. I would say about 90% of my subscribers are women. And I do hear from them saying that they then pass this information on to the male partners in their life.
I have so many questions for you, but that is an interesting thing. I've never been married, had lots of relationships, but I do think this is one of those things where people say, this is just from the outside, it shouldn't have to be this way, like he should go do it. But also it kind of is this way. And then there's things that he does that maybe you shouldn't do the way you do. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, however it happens, it happens. And I sometimes I wished for 5 or 6 years that more men would get involved in the conversation. But then when I'm out in public, I can see out in my own social sphere and everyone knows what I do. So I can see the discomfort that men still have talking about this. I saw it just a couple of weekends ago at a cottage. Like the woman at the head of the table who was hosting a dinner said, Amory, tell everyone what you do. Like, it's amazing. And then I just started talking about it. And it was this complete discomfort around these men who are 50, 60 years old. So we have a ways to go, right? Like, I just want to say that first. Like, what's your kind of, not advice, but what would you say to women who feel like I shouldn't have to do this?
I think they're right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my big message to men is that your partner is going through enough changes. And one of the biggest changes is this unmasking that happens, that women are not no longer prepared to take on more emotional load than they already have, and that they have been carrying for maybe 20, 30 years in a relationship. And so it is incumbent on men to get educated. It isn't incumbent on the women to be their educators. They have enough going on. Now, that said, I think women can point them in the right direction towards resources. I think that, women, as they're starting to find resources, can send things to men and say, hey, maybe read this one or two articles, and that gives you a jumping off point to go and read more. But I absolutely hear what you're saying in terms of discomfort. Absolutely, men are very uncomfortable when it comes to anything to do with women's health, not just the menopause transition. I think anything to do, from early stage puberty through pregnancy, through perimenopause and postmenopause, men have been taught that's a woman's issue. That's not something you need to be aware of. That's something that women deal with.
I feel
And,
like the exception to that rule, if I could jump in, is because I've dated and I've had so many boyfriends, men with sisters, like more than one sister.
right.
They're very different. They're very cool about it. So that's just something, that's my N of one observation.
No, I think they're exposed to the right. And, wonderful in my conversations I've been having with some women who are educating their sons as young as 6 on what is happening to mum and what is mum going through and what do women go through. And I think that's where it really starts is, if we can start educating the next generation as well as this generation, I think lives get better.
Yeah, well, my nephew knows all about it. He's been talking to me about it since he was about 4. Okay, so let's go back to your relationship. How was it? And then how did it start to transform from your perspective?
So we had a very close, loving relationship. We had been together at that time, let's think 8 years. So we had been together about 5 or 6 years at that point. And we had done a lot. We'd started as a long distance relationship. So we had done a lot of work to maintain our relationship over an 18-month period before we actually moved in together. So we were very close. And the biggest change that I noticed was the distance that started to form, a lack of intimacy. And I'm not just talking about physical intimacy. I'm talking about emotional intimacy. As my wife started to pull away because of what she was dealing with. She didn't know what she was dealing with. She did know there were things changing within her body and mentally. There were things changing. And she didn't know what she was dealing with. She didn't want to then have to deal with also maintaining a relationship that I was making demands on her. Demands is perhaps a strong word, but, expectations of what you've got within a relationship, of that two-way street. And, obviously physical intimacy becomes more difficult, becomes painful, there's less desire, libido drops. And so I think all of those changes started to make me wonder what's going on. And like I said, we didn't know what was going on, either of us. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of misunderstanding. And I think when that miscommunication happens, it's natural for human beings to fill in the gaps with stories. We tell ourselves stories of what we believe is happening. And I definitely was doing that. I definitely was telling stories, fortune telling and projecting what I thought was going on in our relationship. And at some point, as years went on with this, because, as and I'm sure as the women know that are watching this, not a lot of men always know, perimenopause isn't over and done with in a week. This is something that's 4, 10, 12 years. And so this change is ongoing. And because it's ongoing, it's hard to keep up if you don't know what's happening. So you continue to tell those stories.
What kind of stories were you telling?
I was no longer attractive, that she no longer wanted to be in a relationship with me.
Right.
That our relationship was doomed, that it had run its course. Maybe this was a point where relationships get to at this stage. You get to this comfort stage, and maybe you just devolve into roommates.
Yeah. Now, Simon, I want to hear more of your stories because those are fascinating to me. I just love getting inside the male brain. But Society really reinforces those stories too, right? Like you sound to me like you had a special kind of relationship, but I feel like society reinforces this. It's work. You shouldn't expect to have an amazing sex life throughout your life. Like I feel like there's a lot and television and culture like around us. Do you feel like what you felt was maybe reinforced out there?
Absolutely. I definitely think that we are taught that relationships evolve, which they do, but in some ways we're taught that they devolve and they become more basic and transactional, um, in that, conversation, especially when things like children and aging parents enter the picture. And we talk about that sandwich generation. There's this perception that there's less time for each other.
Yeah.
And in reality, there is, unless you make that time.
Okay, that's amazing. So what I think might be happening as an outside observer, I always think I want to write a memoir called Everything I've Learned About Marriage by Staying Single.
They're great.
But you have the kids come along and the kids are all the work and everything. And if things start to devolve then you have perimenopause and menopause coming along. And then you have things start to devolve further if you don't have two people who ever sort of sought that connection that is possible to either capture or recapture. And then you have a lot of people just settling into or divorcing. Like, I don't know, that seems when I look around my social circle, that's what I see. I see a couple of great relationships that have figured it out. I see a whole bunch of people who seem like maybe they don't like each other that much, or they're just sort of like coexisting. And then people get divorced and leave and try to, I don't know. What's your take on that being in this space?
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to note that perimenopause doesn't usually cause cracks in a relationship, it reveals them. And if those cracks already exist and they haven't been talked about over years, and that's pretty common, let's face it. We settle into these roles. So the female partner takes on the operations department for home life. They become the COO, and the husband maybe comes in and does finances, not always, but maybe that's the role they're taking on, or maybe they take on some of the physical labor, like, taking the trash out, something like that. But they're not usually taking on the emotional load, which is where women tend to be pushed, not just by their partner, but by society. This is the expectation that they're put on them. You will be the homemaker. And being a homemaker means keeping the kids' doctor's appointments in line, keeping everybody else's schedule in line, meal planning, all of these other things that go into operating a home life. And I think that society is pushing women that way. That's what we're educated to do. Men are centered, women are taught to orbit them. And so it's not that surprising when we reach this point of unmasking that women are like, yeah, no, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. I'm not doing it anymore. Somebody else needs to pick this up. And you're not incapable. You can meal prep. You can plan the meals for a week. You can go grocery shopping. I mean, I've had that conversation with men who say, but I help. I go grocery shopping. I go every week and I do the grocery shopping. And my question to them is, did you check the pantry? Did you check the refrigerator? Did you check the laundry room? For all the other things that you might run out of, did you write the list that you took to the grocery store?
Yeah. Did you from the grocery store?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I will admit, hands up, I do all those things for grocery shopping, but I still phone my wife from the grocery store on occasion to say, which one is it that we have?
Like you're allowed. I have a friend who just stopped cooking. She just said
Yeah.
when they were, I think, early teens, she was so sick of it. She said, I'm not making dinner anymore. And her husband learned to cook and her kids learned to cook. And she's not someone I would expect it from, like, and I know it has to do with this transition. So I think I want to talk about the unmasking, but like we both hold the responsibility for readjusting the relationship in this time. But it's such a slippery terrain when this starts happening, when your partner starts shifting. The stories that you were telling are the stories that we all tell each other when our partner's going through something, even grieving the loss of a parent or a loss of a job. You can't help those thoughts from coming in your brain. So I think that's a really important point. And I just love that you took that out of your head and showed it to us because it's beautiful. But the unmasking that your wife went through, like what sort of other things did you have to adjust to that she was experiencing the shift? Because I know personally there's so many things. It's like almost every other day once you get through menopause, you're like, oh, I don't like that actually. Why have
Yeah.
I been doing that? That person bothers me. I'm not going to spend time with them anymore. That habit is annoying and I need, and finding your voice to say it. So just how did that work for you guys when the unmasking was happening over that time?
So, yeah, I mean, I can give you a very small example, but one that actually helped focus me was I really enjoy eating yogurt. And apparently, the noise of scraping the bottom of the yogurt tub was insanely annoying. And I was told this. Do you have to scrape it like that?
Right.
And that was like, but I'm just eating. It's like, how else would I get the yogurt out of the tub if I
Yep.
didn't scrape the? And so that started to make me realize that there were bigger things. That was one tiny little thing. And if one tiny little thing that I do is annoying, what else is happening?
Okay. Okay.
Because, something that small is annoying, then there must be other things that are annoying. And that's something we need to have a conversation about. Now, we did not have those conversations for the first 5 years of perimenopause. We weren't communicating about it. We were just existing. And like I said, that's where I was telling myself stories about the relationship was breaking down, that this was the end of it, that maybe we were just going to be roommates for the rest of our lives. And I freely admit, I was very fortunate, and I've been very fortunate throughout my adult life. I've spent a lot of time in therapy. And so I had a very good therapist to talk to and to talk things through and what I was experiencing. And, that's always my recommendation that everybody be in therapy. But that if I hadn't had that and if I was coping with it on my own, I think I would have spiraled a lot more in terms of telling those stories and not communicating. And I think that's part of that unmasking is where, I had a conversation a few months ago with Dr. Heather England, who's a sexologist, and we talked about responsive and spontaneous desire and the shift that women experience as part of this unmasking. And that's a big hit to men's egos.
Oh, this is
So
fascinating, Simon. Okay, go on.
women move away from spontaneous desire to responsive desire. And men who have been in a relationship where their partner was spontaneous and occasionally they were spontaneous. And so it was maybe an equal or slightly biased one way or the other. And now they've got to do all the work and that can make them feel undesired.
Okay.
Because it's like, well, you don't want me anymore. So that was another big part of that unmasking is it's not just not putting up with things. There's the biological changes that are happening within a woman and the physiological changes that are happening as part of that unmasking.
Yeah. I think for women, actually, I think it's both for men and women. Sometimes you can be in a relationship and love the sex you're having. And some people are in a relationship and they're having the sex they're having, but they don't necessarily even know if they love it. And I know as a woman, when that estrogen falls away, you start examining everything, right? So the way men approach women for sex in a relationship, or like the way your partner may have approached you for sex, which was fine all the way up until a certain point, may
Right.
become almost repulsive. And I think that's so. I don't know how I'm like. Also, I want to talk to you just about the ego, which is the stories that you tell, right? Like that's the sort of the same thing. But like how that's like that must be devastating when you feel someone kind of recoil. Like how are men supposed to handle that with what they've got going on in their head? Maybe they don't have a therapist.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that it's a huge hit. I think, and I wrote about this for the Good Men Project. I wrote a piece called Love Redefined. And I think part of this is renegotiation that the couples have to do is renegotiate their intimacy, both physical and emotional. And exactly what you said is things that worked before no longer work. And you can't leave it there. There has to be that communication. I mean, we all know this for any successful relationship, not just perimenopause or menopausal relationships, but any successful relationship relies on strong communication. And I think, but especially so at this period in time, you have to have those conversations. even if you don't necessarily know what's going on, even if there hasn't been a diagnosis of perimenopause. I've encountered couples where the partner, the female partner, has absolutely rejected the idea that they are in perimenopause and therefore not gone to get medical help.
Yeah. Well, the first symptom of perimenopause, I often say this, is denial.
Yeah.
Uh, it was mine. And because I always say, no one told me about it, but maybe they did. And then I now have friends 10 years younger who are hormone testing themselves to the ends of the earth. And it's not perimenopause. But so, yeah, so that's another layer, right, of things that you have
Yeah.
to get through. Because if it's perimenopause, then it means you'll go through menopause, and then it means you'll be old and gross. I don't think it's old and gross anymore, but when I was that age, that's what was in my mind, right? Those are the stories that were in my mind. But
Yeah.
how do you find the courage, Simon? Like, how do you find the courage when you feel like the bedrock of your relationship is shifting?
I think you have to ask that question, and I did in my relationship, is how much do I want this? You can take the easy route out, which is, we talked about separation and divorce, which is not, I say that's the easy, it's not easy, but it's the alternative route. Or you can decide that you want to do the work. And I think it is an either or, because the alternative is it just degrades and you become strangers. So that's the third path. You can do the work, you can become strangers, or you can become distant and you can separate and divorce. And I don't think it's that surprising that, and though there is no yet direct causation, I think there's some reasonable correlation that 60% of divorces in that perimenopause or menopausal age group are instigated by women now. And I think that's part of that unmasking. And I think a lot of times that comes as a shock to men.
Yeah.
Because they haven't been involved in those conversations. There haven't been those conversations having.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it is courage. You do have to say to yourself, do I want this? And if the answer is yes, then ultimately you've got to rip the Band-Aid off. Now, research shows that men are very, very bad at instigating these conversations. They want them, but they're very bad at starting them, usually because of fear of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And some of that fear has come out of mood swings, unpredictability, and not knowing who the person is that they got up with that morning, because the woman herself doesn't know who she is when she wakes up that morning. And maybe she's been awake since 3 a.m. and she's not going to be in the best place to have that conversation. So it unfortunately does come back to women being willing to start the conversations. Now, I use a framework called sit, listen, believe, which is sit down away from everything else, away from children, parents, meal times, chores, everything else, and make it time bound. Let's sit down for 5 minutes. Let's sit down for 10 minutes. Anybody can do something for 5 or 10 minutes. You can suffer through something for 5 or 10 minutes. That's less than you spend in the dentist chair. And then listen. And I think this goes both ways. Actively listen to what the other person is saying. Don't just wait for your turn to talk. And then the last part, and I think this is especially appropriate for men, is believe. The best education a man can get is from the woman in front of him. Believe her lived experience. That's the education. You can read as much as you like. You can watch as many TikToks as you like. You can pick up as many pamphlets at the doctor's office as you like. Ultimately, that doesn't matter unless you understand how that impacts your partner. So, for example, we will come back to things like hot flashes, because that's even though that isn't the number one symptom, that's the one everybody talks about. You might understand what a hot flash is. You might even understand the biology behind it. But if you don't understand what a hot flash means to your partner, then you don't really understand hot flash. And that's the same with perimenopause. If you don't understand, you might have read up on other symptoms, depending on who you read, there's between 30 and 100 different symptoms. You might have read up on those. If you don't understand how those impact your partner, you don't understand it.
Yeah. And if you can't receive that,
right,
she doesn't like anything anymore that she used to like, or she was crying in the car and then she was crying at like it. I guess really the crux is, if your partner is willing to hear you and believe you, then you can move forward. But the cracks are revealed, as you said, at this time. So if you don't have a partner who's willing to do any of this stuff, that's the really hard thing. And I do hear from women all the time.
Yeah.
And you see women talking all the time where it's like, he doesn't care. And then I guess that's the point where you have to make a decision if your relationship's going to move forward or not. And that's the heartbreaking part. So that's kind of where people either decide, like, I'm going to stay or go. This is worth it. Let's face it, a lot of people got married, not like you and your wife, Simon. Like a lot of people got married because it was a convenient time to get married and they were with
Mhm.
people at the time. So that's also a big part of this, I think, is that people are figuring this out because we were all expected to get married.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially for the age group that we're looking at. I think I would like to think it's less true of millennials who are now approaching or in early stage perimenopause. But I think certainly for the age group that tend to be focused on, that 45 to 64-year-old age group, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's part of the cracks to get revealed. And then it's a decision of how big are the cracks, how many are there, and do we want to fix them?
Do the cracks, how many are there, and do we want to fix them? And can they be fixed?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I never knew marriage therapists would recommend that you get divorced. That was funny to me. It's not funny, but I've had some friends who are like, they said, yeah, this can't be fixed. They're doing that.
Yeah, some things are broken.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where they're at. Yeah.
So as you started to sit and listen and believe and you started to work through this, how did it start to feel better for both of you?
So I think the first thing was, and my wife has actually said this to me, so which was great because it was very supportive of her to say this. But once I started to dig in, once I started to do the research and to listen to her and ask those appropriate questions, one of the things that she said to me was, I finally feel seen. And I think that was a big turning point for her, was she did feel believed. She felt seen. She felt that I actually now understood what was happening. And more importantly, even if I didn't necessarily understand it all, I actually believed what was happening to her, that it was real. And especially the fact that she'd been dismissed by the medical world and by clinicians for so long, for a 4-year period, being told that they didn't believe her, to have her partner not believe her as well. That's a double whammy. Well, who does believe me then?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that was the big turning point for us, was the point where she got to where she got an OB that believed her and was listening and made her feel seen. And then I was able to come alongside and do the same thing. And I think that's key, is getting your partner to that point where they do feel seen by you, that you actually have been able to communicate that you believe what's happening to them. And that's not easy. I mean, sometimes I make it sound like, oh yeah, we have this ideal relationship and nothing ever goes wrong. No, I mean, my wife still has mood swings. My wife still experiences hot flashes. She still experiences what we call the meat ick. Meat ick, where there's just the thought, the sight, the sound of meat is repulsive, 100% repulsive. So me suggesting that we have rotisserie chicken for dinner, not a good idea. So adapting menus at the last minute, or being told that, no, that's not what we're eating. I know that's what we were talking about eating, but today I have the meat ick. That's not happening. And I think that's a big thing for families, that age-old question, what's for dinner? Well, that answer is going to be very, very different from now on.
Yeah.
Wow. You talked about your friend saying that, I'm not cooking anymore. If you want to eat a certain thing, that's great. You cook it, but I'm not cooking it because it's repulsive to me.
I think opening up your idea that the way things have been could change, opening up your mind to the possibility that things can change. And that the way, even running the household, a lot of women can't imagine if they release some of that control. Because let's face it, when we're running everything, we have control of everything, when everything's up here. And it's easy to become resentful, but also not want to relinquish the control. So that's really, I think, important just from the outside. And when I've seen my friends do it, how their life changes. And the feeling of being heard and believed, I mean, that's all any of us ever wanted. And if we haven't had it, and many of us haven't had it or have longed for it in certain ways, and this cloak of estrogen that we wear has made that okay. Like, you've explained it away. But
Hmm.
just knowing that we all want that. When someone just listens to you and accepts what you say, it's literally the most beautiful feeling. And it's one of the most beautiful feelings. So for all of us, men and women.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
it's hard though.
good point there. And I've raised this point with people before, with women before, is if you want them to step up, you have to practice stepping back.
Simon, you must be a
And,
market something.
but you do. I mean, as women, as you just said, you're in control of this. You've been in control of this for decades. If you want the support, if you want them to step up, you've got to step back and allow men to make mistakes because they will. They're not going to do it the way you do it. They're going to do it the way that makes sense to them. And that's certainly been a discussion in my household is the way I do things is not the way my wife does them. And occasionally we still butt heads over who's right. And at the end of the day, doesn't matter as long as the job gets done. As long as the outcome is right, it doesn't really matter who's right. So there's some give and take there. And I think that's a normal part of relationships. But yeah, she's had to learn to step back and allow me to step in and do things and offer to take things on.
Okay. And of the men you speak to, what sort of other sort of unusual or things maybe you don't hear spoken about that they talk about? Have you heard any? We hear the main things, but is there anything that you think needs to be talked about more?
Yeah, so I think, we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about aging, and I actually had a conversation with a woman whose partner, it took them about 3 to 4 weeks to accept their partner was in perimenopause. So they were very fortunate. They had a good doctor, even though they're only in their early 40s. They had a very good doctor who said, yes, it's perimenopause, not the usual, you're too young. The husband refused to accept it. And the refusal was really based on the fact, well, at 41, if you're aging, then, and I'm that a little bit older than you, then I'm aging. And what does that mean for me? And I think the thing that we don't recognize always is the loss of identity for men at this stage in life. They're getting older, expectations of them change at home and more importantly in the workplace. There's a big shift. Maybe there's new people coming in with new, fresh ideas and they can feel sidelined. And then there's that expectation of am I where I ought to be at this stage in my life? Is this where I thought I would be in this stage of life?
Yeah.
And sometimes they can't answer yes to that. Sometimes the answer is no. And that's a big identity shift. And then on top of that, they have this relationship change, which is also affecting their identity. So I think that's one of the biggest things that's come out of my conversations with men is this identity shift and getting them away from personalization. Conversation I had just the other day, this week, where even though they were a strong couple, he was still at the stage of, why is this happening to me? And we have to get men past that. We have to get men past that. Why is it happening to me? Because it is happening to them, but it's not happening to them in isolation. Menopause doesn't happen in isolation, either to the woman or to the man. It happens to everybody.
Yeah. And I guess there's a lot of talk about if this was happening in men, it would be better and we would have more solutions. There would be hormone therapy shortages. There's no Viagra shortages. It's all very complicated. And yes, men have been centered, but yes, they are also going through a midlife reckoning. So just all those things can be true at the same time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I absolutely agree. And I do continue to agree with people that there is woefully low amounts of research being done on women's health generally. I do think, and maybe this is because I'm in the bubble of menopause, but I do see a lot more research coming out on a weekly basis on the impacts, the health impacts, the sociological impacts of the menopause transition on women and their lives. So I think that's hopeful. I mean, I do feel hopeful. Most of it is, as you know, is coming out of Europe. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the landmark changes that are happening in society. But I'm hopeful.
Okay, so wrapping up, that you are doing your thing, and I'm noticing other men doing their thing. There's a book written by a man and a woman out of Australia called "Don't Be a Dick," which I
Yeah.
love. Don't be a dick. What are you thinking about Some of the guys have gone viral, like there's a guy who talks about manifestation and he beautifully speaks about what women are going through. There's the fellow that's gone viral with the signs talking about what women have gone through. There's
Oh,
a
yeah.
trainer from Australia who's absolutely hilarious about his partner's trainer. I should have the names of these people, but I can't remember them. Anyway, what do you like about it? How do you feel about it? Do you like the tone? Yeah, how do you feel about all of it?
I think that some of the humor is good because it's a pressure valve. It releases a pressure valve. I'm cautious with it. I don't use a lot of humor in mine unless it's self-deprecating because I've made a lot of mistakes because it can minimize the female experience. And I think we have to be very, very careful of that. That said, there is another book written by Joe Warner, Burning Up, Frozen Out, which came out this year. There are other books that are coming out, and I'm encouraged by that more men want to be part of the conversation. Not just they want to be part of the conversation, but they want other men to be part of the conversation. And I think it's important. And what part of what I write for is not just the home relationship, but the whole relationship. So every man knows a woman in perimenopause or the menopause transition. Every man knows one woman. Either they're partnered, they're in a family relationship, or they're in a work relationship. And even if they're in a work relationship, if they've got people that they're managing, they've probably got this going on at home and they're not making the connection between what's going on at home and what's happening in the workplace. And so that's another aspect where I think the more we educate men, the more we invite them into conversations, we impact all aspects of women's lives, not just their home life.
I'm tearing up, Simon, because I'm thinking it's not it's not just your wife. It could be your daughter if you're older, your sister, your employee, your colleague, your friend, and so that it's all the people in your sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there is no man that doesn't know whether he's aware of it, but there is no man that doesn't know a woman going through the menopause transition.
Widen
Absolutely.
your gaze. I love that. Everything
Yeah.
you will help you in every relationship that you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Simon. Is there anything else you'd like to say to wrap up? Anything I asked you?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing is keep listening. I mean, have those conversations continuously and keep listening.
I just feel so good talking to you. I'm so glad you're here. And thank you to everyone for joining us. I'll be sending this out with notes and things later. So, and I think you probably will too. So anyway, we'll keep talking. We'll keep talking about this.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.